why this matters. So let me give you the story. So some legislators like Laura Reinbold, who's in the back there, she's been deeply affected by it. Your governor was affected by it. Senator Hughes and others over the years have been affected by this binding caucus rule. And what it does, in essence, is your legislator, when they go down to Juneau, they can be a part of a caucus, right? There's nothing wrong with caucus. I want to be crystal clear. Caucus is just a group of people that get together that generally agree. Aviation caucus, farm caucus, a majority caucus, minority caucus, that are no big deal. Nothing wrong with that. Just people getting together to work on issues that they agree. But Alaska has its own unique twist of this binding caucus rule. And what the binding caucus requires you to do to be a part of a caucus is you have to pledge your votes essentially to leadership for the full 2 years. So in advance, what I would call a quid pro quo, to get to be a part of the caucus, you have to agree to give all of your votes to leadership on all budgetary items. You have no idea what that budget's going to be. You don't know if it's going to be good or bad, big or small. Is it going to have a full PFD, a $1 PFD? You don't know how big the budget's going to be for cuts or additions, etc. No idea. But you're saying, I'm going to give you this vote for the next 2 years. Now that's kind of strange, right? You probably want your legislator to see what the budgets are before they vote for it. But in Alaska, we don't do it that way. You have to pledge your vote and say yes before you ever see what those budgets are. That's part number one. Part number two is you also have to agree to say yes on all procedural votes. And everybody goes, what the heck is this procedural vote thing? Well, let me tell you why it matters. When you're on the floor, both the Senate President and the House Speaker have the authority with their leadership teams to agree on what a procedural vote will be. That procedural vote can make a great difference, and I'll give you some, for examples that I saw with my own eyes. I wanted to, for example, with Senator Costello and Senator Wilkowski, a Democrat, right? We tried to get a repeal bill through of SB 91. Now, most people know what SB 91 was, the soft on crime bill. We repealed most of that last year, thank goodness. But the year before, we tried to get a repeal movement on that. We tried to get a 50-50 on the PFD to protect it so that we would have to move forward and we would have some measure on that, right? And there was another bill. The Senate President at the time used procedural votes to block those repeal bills from moving. Yet they use them all the time as a political weapon. They can either block legislation, they can move legislation. They can use procedural votes. They can shut you down on the floor to do certain things. So the procedural votes often matter as much as the budgetary votes. Both of those items are required for you to say yes to and pledge your vote to leadership for the entire 2-year legislative session. If your legislator does not agree to those rules, they don't get to be on the team. If I say no to that and say, I cannot in good conscience give my vote to you without knowing what I'm voting for the next 2 years, they go, you don't get to play, Mike. 20 senators in Alaska, 13 Republicans. If I don't agree to those rules, I don't get to play the game.
Thank you.
I don't get committee chairmanships or good committees. I don't get extra staff, the ability to influence and help and work for the state, work for you, and do the things that need to be done. I'm shoved off to the side. I'm disenfranchised. Now, that's part one. That's the bribe. That's why I call it the quid pro quo. You get this for this in exchange for something, right? Now imagine if I came in and said, sir, I'm going to give you $1,000. I want you to vote for this. That's illegal. You can't do that. You can go to jail for that. Matter of fact, it happened a few years ago with the Vigo scandal in Alaska. Some people might remember that one. Yep. But as a legislator, we are exempt from those things. So I can come and say, I'm going to give you this stuff, but you're going to give me your vote for it. And we go, that's perfectly fine. We actually do business that way in Alaska, folks. It's how we do business. It's accepted here. How can that be so? Well, let me give you part two of the story. So part number two. Not only do you have to agree to those things and pledge your vote, if you decide somewhere during that time that you can't vote for it, PFD is important in your district and they're going to take it like we've done for years now, right? Maybe the budget's getting too big and you promise to reduce the budget. And the governor comes in with some great vetoes and actually drops the budget for real, and then they add them all back and you go, I can't vote for that. You know what happens now? Now you get punished. There is a coercive factor to this. I ask this question. They say all the time, they're trying to counter this message right now. Well, you can vote however you want, Mike. I said, yes, but I really can't, because this is my example. I come into your store, sir, and I say, there's a cash register, you're standing in front of it, I'm going to take a gun, I'm going to point it at you and say, give me all your cash. But, Eric, you get a choice. You don't have to give me your cash, but I'm going to shoot you. And you're like, whoa, that's not much of a choice. When you are in the Alaska legislature in a binding caucus, if you decide that you can't vote for something because it's not what your constituents want, it's not what you promised in the campaign, it's not what you think is best for your district or the state, you will vote that way, or else. This is the or else part of it. I have watched legislators sitting in their seat, in a couch, last summer, when they changed the deal and broke the promise, again, to us for our modified caucus agreement, I watched legislators so sick to their stomach, Laura Reinbold was one of them, that they physically felt like they were going to throw up because they were being coerced. There was a coercion factor in this. You will do it or else, right? If you don't vote this way, what are we going to do to you? We're going to punish you. We're going to take your staff, which they did. We're going to kick you off your committee chairmanships where you have influence, which they did. We're going to take your committees away from you, which they did. They coerce you into voting a way that they want you to vote because you pledged your vote. Remember? Even if you say you can't, I don't want to, it doesn't work. It's against the law because we're not following the PFD statute. For an example, you will do it anyways or else. You will be punished. That's called coercion, folks. Look it up in the Alaska statute. I put this out there on Facebook. Your arm is being twisted. It says right in the coercion statute, making a legislator take an action that they are allowed to take and preventing them from doing it or causing them to take an action they are legally allowed to abstain from is coercion by definition. But in the state of Alaska, the legislative leadership in the bodies can coerce you to take a vote or not take a vote, and it's absolutely legal. That's how we do business.
How is
So,
it legal?
because it is not written anywhere. It is not in the Constitution. It is not in the statutes. It is not even in the uniform rules.
And
Believe
they
me,
don't
folks,
want it
I've studied this one ad nauseum.
And they don't want it in writing?
Why would they? Why would you want something in writing that then the public could take out there and all of a sudden show you that, oh my goodness, my legislator's doing what? You'd be flabbergasted if you saw how this agreement went. As a matter of fact, we asked Senator Cathy Giessel, who's the Senate President, to produce the piece of paper that we agreed to and wrote on the easel with our agreement. And back in January this year, when they slaughtered myself and Laura Reinbold and Senator Hughes, we lost all, they took everything from us, right? And guess what? She can't find it. It's gone, folks. We lost it. Fortunately, I've documented all these things, so I wrote it, put it on Facebook. So you can go back to November 2018 if you want to see it. It's out there for the world to see. I know how to document everything now. So it's not written down for good reason. Did you know where this came from? This is some of the research stuff here. I want to get into this. Does anybody want to take a guess how long we've had the binding caucus? Anybody? Come on.
Long time.
Long time. Since statehood is correct. Do you know who started it?
Democrats.
Correct! Well, I got some winners here. I got some prizes to go in this thing. Correct! The Democrats actually started it, but it's an equal opportunity offensive idea. Why? Because Republicans do it now too. Democrats do it. Republicans do it. The House does it. The Senate does it. Everybody has done this, okay? And everybody has used it in ways that are less than optimum. And when we had lots of money, when you realize, look back, and there was oil money flowing and all that, that was fine. They paid people off, lots of money, and big deal, right? They were just, everybody was happy and they did their thing. Scott Ogan, who's a former state senator, works for me as my senior policy advisor. Well, he works at half pay now because they stripped, from him. He's still sticking around for some reason. And he said, yeah, back in the day, the saying was the Senate traveled and the House worked. Because they just went on junkets all over the world. They had all this money flowing in, right? So here's another part of this study. I decided after this happened to us, I wasn't going to do this until 21st of January when they stripped us of everything, which, by the way, was a broken promise. They were holding myself and Senator Reinbold and Senator Hughes accountable and stripped all those things from us because we allegedly broke that one vote last year. Well, Senator Hughes and I, you might remember, somebody saw us, we walked off the floor, we said, the heck with that, we're out of here. We're not even going to vote on this thing, it's so ridiculous. They changed the rules. Senator Reinbold stuck it out on the floor, and she said, no, I'm not voting for that. I'm like, good for her. I'm like, I'm not voting for this at all. So out we went. We thought we were going to get pulled and by the troopers, but they let us go and excused us. Those very same leadership folks, this is the Senate specific, not to the House, others can talk about the House, said that we broke that promise and that's what this stuff is for. Would you like to know that I have documented and said it 7 different times they've broken that exact same agreement. 7 times our leadership's broken that in the last year and a half. Where's the punishment? Where's the stripping of resources? John Caucus sat up there in Fairbanks and he called myself and Senator Hughes and Senator Reinbold cowards for not taking that vote. I dare him to say that to my face. He hasn't said it yet. Because they won't. Because it's wrong. And they know they're wrong. When I made the speech on the floor back on the 20th of March this year, nobody would even look me in the eyes when we talked about trying to open up our savings account when our private sector and you folks are getting slaughtered because of what happened with COVID response. Okay, I'm off topic here. Back on topic. Sorry. I'm getting fired up. You guys know me. I start talking. Hands come out. Flying airplanes again. I'm supposed to be funny when I do this. So here's, I think, probably the most amazing thing happened when Michelle and I, my wife, who's somewhere around here, though she's short, so she can be hard to see. She'll hit me for that. We decided, you know what, I want to know how else the rest of the country does business. Am I just crazy? Is it just Alaska? Or is it everybody else does this too, and I'm just out to lunch, and so be it, I got to eat this, right? So I said, you know what, I'm going to start picking up the phone. I started making phone calls. Many people have been affected by this binding caucus, but we've never sat down as a state, I think, and had this debate and gotten the research and go, what happens everywhere else? I said, I'm done. After how they treated me and other folks, and then basically did what? Wanted my silence, wanted our silence, and silenced who? Not me that's being silenced. Who's being silenced? You are. When I get told, true story, in caucus, she can validate it, Senate President Cathy Giessel told me not only was I being punished for my no vote for not being there, you're going to love this one, folks. She said, and Laura can back me up if she chooses to, she said, Mike, you're also being punished for your speech. Wow. Do you see a problem with that kind of abuse of power, folks? Have you ever heard of something called the Constitution and your First Amendment right to speak? They're using the defense of the speech and debate clause that legislators are immune and they can't be held for their speech. I'm like, what are you doing to me? Wow. First Amendment right violated, and nobody bats an eye. Right. Do you see where we are as a state, folks? How corrupt we have become to the core. Wow. So I called around the country. I wanted to know. My wife and I spent hundreds of hours documenting and talking. I have now, at this point, I know some of you saw this, I have gone out and talked to, I can't get anything from Maryland for some reason, but 48 of the 49 states, I am taking the time to call and talk to a state senator in 48 of the 49 other states. 48 of 49. And got emails from Maryland, so you can say 49 of 49. Democrats, Republicans, mostly state senators, but some House members thrown in, Senate presidents, minority leaders, majority leaders. Would you like to guess how many other states do business like Alaska? Anybody want to take a guess? Zero. Zero. You got it. Yay, Alaska. We're number one again, but not the way we want to be. Okay? Nobody else in the country does this, folks. This is not hearsay. They're trying to destroy the message and the messenger. I've listened to some of them say it's noise. Oh, they call it something different. I represented fairly exactly how we do business, what I just told you, to all of these other state senators. Every one of them, to a person, man and woman, said the exact same thing. What in the world are you doing up there? That's un-American. That's unethical. It's illegal. It's unconstitutional. Holy cow, some colorful language I will not repeat in this audience. Some of the things were amazing. One of them was a fighter pilot. I happen to know him. He's the Senate President of Arkansas. He's used some language that I would never repeat again, but it was very clear that he did not support the fighting caucus. Nobody does this, folks, in the country. And they all had a response that was like, you've got to be kidding me. The senior Tennessee female Republican said, what are you running up there, Mike, a banana republic? And I said, good question. I can't argue that. All right. And to be fair, one state, Washington State, the Senate president there that I talked to said that, well, we have something kind of like your binding caucus in the for procedural votes only. We would never require anybody to vote in the budget. I'd have a riot on my hands if I did that. He's like, well, procedural votes, yes. I said, well, what happens if somebody says they can't? It's a hot button issue for the district. I would give them a walk-off. You know what would happen if I went to Senate President Cathy Giessel and asked for a walk-off? Too bad, sucker. You gave me your pledge. You pledged your vote. Do it or else. That's the exact answer we got. That's not a made-up story. And there's about 6 or 7 other states where they said, well, yeah, you can. There's never a pledge. We don't do that. And we don't punish people. And there's no, coercion. But yeah, if you make the Senate president angry or the House Speaker angry, they'll come after you. They'll strip you off a committee or something. I was like, but you don't lose everything? No, we would never do that. So I'm like, oh, good Lord. So there's the story and why it is so critical, because what happens under a binding caucus, I've heard the reasons, the last 3 things, and I'm going to stop, and then I'm going to ask for questions if you have them, and that'll be the end of the pitch. I've heard the reasons why we have to have a binding caucus in Alaska. It costs us money, it saves us money, and without it, absolutely nothing can get done. So how does that work? Well, it costs us money because I've asked certain legislators, well, what happens if we don't have it? Well, then you have to give money to different legislators to get them to vote for the budget. Like, you bribe them? No, that's not what we're saying. We don't bribe them. Well, that's what it sounds like. You're giving them money in the budget, right? Oh, well, that's not what we mean. Okay, got that. It's going to save us money for the same kind of a reason, because then, we can force the budget down, right? Because we've had a binding caucus for the last 10 years, and how much money have we saved? I'm not sure that argument works very well. And the final one is, love this one, you cannot get anything done. It will be a stalemate. It will fail on the floor. It'll be absolute chaos. I go, oh my God, we better have the binding caucus. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. How do the other 49 states do it without that?
Yeah.
I don't think that argument works either. There's three major arguments you hear, and they all fall flat, folks. They're red herring. It doesn't work because nobody else in the country does it that way. And yet we do. And it's unethical. And it coerces your legislator. And it takes away your vote. Tell me how it saved us money when we had $14 billion in the CBR 10 years ago. And now we've got nothing. And that's under a binding caucus. Tell me that. Tell me what's happened to the PFD, that's the people share. Right? They're a resource. We can spread it out, talk about it all day long. But the PFD, gone. And I'm telling you right now, there's not going to be much left because the size of government's going up. But that happened under the rule of binding caucus. Right? And before you think all Democrats and Republicans, oh no, it's bipartisan. There's Democrat and Republicans in the Senate majority. Same thing in the House. And who's in charge of the House? Whew, got that one. Right? Democrats mostly in charge. So the reasons for having a binding caucus that you're going to hear from different people trying to destroy the message of the messenger are false. And I can prove it. And I have proved it by calling around the country. And one last thing. Did you know that we have not always had a binding caucus in Alaska? It's been around since 1959, but there's a senator I talked to in Fairbanks earlier this year who, when he was in the Senate on financing as a co-chair, they didn't have the binding caucus. So it is absolutely false. The legislature said, we've always had it here. No, we haven't. And I can tell you by talking to people, because I don't make this stuff up, folks. I take the time to research it and ask the questions and reach out to the real people. And not only did we not have it those couple of years, at least that, and some other times I've heard it's been kind of on and off, he said they reduced the budget $50 million each year. So the data's there. So that's my pitch. That's the story. That's why it's so critical, because it is taking away your voice. It is taking us somewhere we don't want to go. And it is consolidating an immense amount of power into the hands of a few. And that is a dangerous thing. When 60 legislators don't have a voice, it's more like 6. That's not a place we want to be, folks. That's not what our representative republic was meant to be. It was meant to be everybody had an equal voice. And I'm here to tell you in Alaska right now, we don't. You don't. So that's my pitch. I'm done. I'm happy to ask questions. What do you got?
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Could you elaborate a little bit and give us a flavor of what it's, or compare and contrast these benefits of being part of this binding caucus and what it's like to be on the outside, so to speak? Give us a flavor of what that means, what that looks like, one against the other.
So if you're in the caucus, you get to go to the meetings where they have strategy and they talk about what's going to happen, all those things behind closed doors. We have an Open Meetings Act, which is supposed to, but the legislature, imagine that, has exempted themselves from most of the Open Meetings Act things, so we can do things behind closed doors, and we've exempted ourselves from a lot of these laws too, as I've discovered, very hard to. People are like, oh, you're going to file a lawsuit. Well, maybe I'm looking at that option, but it's very hard to do because you go, well, then they're protected by this and this and this. I go, what the heck can they not do? And it's kind of an interesting dichotomy there with this. But to answer your question, if you're in the caucus, then you have resources, right? Because you're going to get some committees, probably some important ones. You're going to get a chairmanship or two, because I had 2. They took both away. I had 5 committees, took them all away. I was on 3 finance subcommittees, took those away. I had 4 staff, they took 2 of those away, really 2.5.
Wow.
So how am I as a legislator supposed to, when they offered, for all of that, they offered me 1 committee to the side. That was it. Yeah, you tell me how I'm effective for you in taxpayer dollars with that. How am I being an effective representative? How am I doing the work of Alaska with that kind of workload? And by the way, then you're going to love this one. They started complaining about how busy they were. I'm like, really? You just took 3 senators and slaughtered us and took all our state. You guys had to do all that work. Good Lord, you guys have lost your minds. So you have the ability to sit inside, know what's going on, strategy, talk about bills and things that are coming up. You will get chairmanships in committees and the extra staff to do the workload so that you can influence policy. You're a part of it. Because remember, we'll also say, well, you always have a vote. I mean, you always have input to the process, right? The budget. Yeah. Oh, well, let me tell you how that input works. I gave all kinds of input as we did to protect the PFT and to reduce the budget and support the governor's veto, so we got a real reduction, not a fake reduction to the budget, because the reduction they crowed about last year was only to Walker's, a small reduction to Walker's increases to the budget, so it didn't actually push the budget down. A little dirty secret they don't want to tell you. Okay? But as that whole thing played out, guess what? Our input, you want to know how much of that input we got when they came out of their little conference committee with the budget, the final version? None of that stuff. That was gone. What input do I have? And remember, that's because I pledged my vote. And I said I would vote for it no matter what. So even when I said that's wrong, it doesn't follow the statute, it's not what we agreed to, it's not downward pressure on the budget, it's going the other way. Doesn't matter. I'm going to deal with those 4 basic people, finance co-chairs, come out of that meeting and say, this is the budget you're voting for, or else. Now, the caveat is I could be on the outside and not have those resources. The good news is I can vote on the budget. There's not much else they can take from me, right? My joke right now is you guys know that watch me on Facebook, I had a whiteboard. I think it's still in my office. They may have taken that from me. I'm not really sure. So, it's kind of a joke. So that's the difference between those. Are you willing to, and I'm going to say it very harshly this way, are you willing to sell your soul to have a seat at the table? You should not have to sell your soul to have a seat at the table, to be an effective representative, to be a part of a Republican team that's in a Republican-controlled Senate. Right. Or in a Republican-controlled House, and all of a sudden it's handed over to the Democrats. What in God's green earth is going on? But that's how we do it here, because we've accepted this as normal, when nobody else does. There's a couple answers. I do not expect to get legislative relief, because I don't think, when all these legislators look at it, I think the majority of them are still grown up under a binding caucus. They think it's normal, it's okay. I think they also see when they're turning leadership, they're going to have that kind of power. People see that and latch onto it. So I don't expect to get the bills through the legislature that I have filed, and that will be filed in January. Knowing our judiciary, and having filed bills against them as well to make it a cleaner process, I don't expect to get a lot of help from the judiciary. See, the problem with me, folks, is I'm poking all the wrong bears here, I guess, but bears need to be poked, and that's bottom line, right? So I'm not afraid to do it, it's just how much you're going to get. So I don't expect that. A citizens initiative process is probably going to be the end result of this. When the legislature won't do it, you guys have to do it. And that process was started outside of anything I did. I had a guy call me up about a month ago and says, Mike, I'm starting this. I'm like, go for it, do it, I'll help you out, whatever. I think that our money, time, and effort, those that are willing and want to see this change, the way we're going to affect that is in 2 years for that election cycle to get it on the ballot. Just like you've seen these other props and things that come up, Proposition 1, 2, 3, whatever, call it something. I think that's how we'll do that. And one of 2 things will take place at that point. Either the legislature will do nothing, and then it will go on the ballot, and I can tell you right now, based on the response I'm getting, it will pass, and it will pass overwhelmingly, because when the people hear about this, they're all doing what you're doing. What? That's the reaction. It's like SB 91. It's like, oh, down, thumbs down. Or what may happen is the legislature will realize that it's coming and they can't stop it, and they will pass some version of the bill themselves. I'm going to have to be very careful on that one, because they'll try to give themselves loopholes and ways to get out of it. We'll have to be careful, because they do that. And they did it. I was there in the meeting for HB 49, I think it was, or 44. Laura could maybe remind me of this. It was the ethics one. I had one of them, I won't say name, came in and told me, he's like, Mike, we've got to pass this bill, because if we don't pass this bill, then we're going to get stuck with what the people are going to pass, and then, but if we do it now, then we can do it ourselves, we can manipulate stuff. I'm like, completely subverting the will of people. But that's how they think, and it's okay. It's normal, folks, that's what it is. So good question. I know there's a couple others.